Welcome to Running the Table, the podcast where we run through everything on the table in the world of college basketball. Postseason boiler ball recaps? You bet I'm still talking Purdue basketball as they make their way through the Big Ten tournament and hopefully through the NCAA tournament. They started off their tourney championship defense with a grinded out test in Michigan State up in Minneapolis, Minnesota. But without further ado, let's run it. So this one ended in a very low scoring 67-62 matchup in favor of Purdue. After the double bye, Purdue made their Big Ten tournament debut earlier today, facing the Michigan State Spartans for the second time in their last 4 games. Similar to their previous matchup, this was another grinded out battle, but with this time much less scoring. Zach Edey had his way as per usual against Michigan State, but nobody else really got it going that much for the Boilers, and we had a major scare in the second half when Braden Smith went down with a potential lower leg injury, which we'll get into here shortly. Michigan State jumped out to an early 3-2 lead with a Tyson Walker 3 on their very first possession, but as it turns out, that would be their only lead of the game. Zach Edey went to work getting 15 first half points, while much of Purdue's outside game wasn't working, only getting 1 3 out of Lance Jones in the entire half. The offensive struggles were apparent on both sides, as both teams defended well, caused turnovers, and just made life difficult. Michigan State did a much better job of getting out in transition and getting points off turnovers, with 14 points off turnovers throughout the game, as opposed to Purdue's 5, despite the Spartans having 13 turnovers to Purdue's 11. Michigan State knew they needed to run and take advantage of not going against the Boilers' set defense, blanking Purdue 18-0 on fast break points. Despite their success getting out in transition, Michigan State's half-court offense struggled so much that Purdue still found themselves with a 7-point lead at halftime, 34-27. Scoring 27 in the first half, not a great recipe for success, I'm not going to lie. But Purdue has always seemed like the king of halftime adjustments, and to start the half, it seemed like more of the same, with an Edey bucket and a Smith 3 bringing their lead up to 12 in just a minute and a half of play. But Michigan State would not go quietly, similar to their last matchup, and would grind their way back with quality defense, making Zach Edey try to take some tough shots, and then using their physicality to get buckets at the basket throughout much of the second half. Both teams found themselves on quite a drought for about 7 minutes, with both teams scoring just 6 points apiece in that span. And some of that, at least for the Boilers, came from losing Braden Smith with what looked like could have been a pretty scary injury. He was going up for a contested driving layup, and he got hit on his right leg just above the knee as he came down on that leg, and his calf just sort of spasmed and popped, and it looked very nerve-wracking, especially to watch back in slow motion, and he immediately went down, clutching that leg around the knee, leaving Purdue fans in a stunned hush. He would be helped to the tunnel and training room, where he would go through some testing and treatment to make sure nothing was seriously damaged. And against some Purdue fans' wishes, he actually came back out from the locker room and came back into the game with about 7 minutes to play. Did he have a significant effect on the end of the game for Purdue's offense and winning this game? For sure. But what a lot of us were thinking is about the bigger picture here. We didn't want him to get hurt worse and be out for the NCAA tournament. We certainly need him for us to be at anywhere near full strength for this team. But regardless, Braden's a warrior, and if he could play, he was going to play. As it turns out, whatever injury he went through didn't seem to be all that bad and was kind of a stunner. He was able to work it out and get back into the game and look pretty natural, even though he was a little bit apprehensive at first. But he would go on to make a key pass to Fletcher Loyer, who knocked down the biggest shot of the game, which was a corner 3 to break the 56-56 tie with a minute and a half to go. Despite Purdue's free throw struggles in this game, they were able to make enough free throws and get enough stops to maintain about a 2-possession game or 2-possession lead late and never get too scared right there at the end, which is going to be key for whatever close games they run into for the rest of the Big Ten tournament, as well as the NCAA tournament. As we get into some of the top performers of this one, guess who? Zach Edey. He ended up with 29 points on 10 of 16 shooting, only 9 of 14 from the free throw line, and some of those were pretty key misses down the stretch, with 12 rebounds, 4 assists, and 2 blocks. Similar to his previous performances against Michigan State, Zach Edey loves playing the Spartans, and some of it's the way they defend him. Some of it is the fact that they don't really have a ton of size to be able to really battle with him without fouling. Secondly, for Purdue, didn't really have a great secondary scorer in this one. Our second leading scorer happened to be Lance Jones with 10 points on 2 of 7 shooting and 1 for 5 from 3. So his 1-3 was the one in the first half that they got. So a great shot, but he really wasn't playing his best basketball on the offensive end. And you ended up 5 for 7 from the free throw line, and 2 of those free throws came as key free throws late. So those were very big down the stretch. 4 rebounds, 3 steals, and a stat you won't find on the box score, he had 4 charges and or drawn fouls on the defensive end that ended up being huge throughout the course of the game. He took a couple of charges there on drives against guys like Tyson Walker. I think he had one on AJ Hoggard, as well as he got Malik Hall into a foul there in later on in the second half, essentially setting a rough moving screen. So despite him not having a fantastic offensive game, he was a key defensive difference maker on the defensive end of the floor. So, the box score doesn't say anything, and obviously 3 steals is still great. But he really, in my opinion, won the game for Purdue the way he defended so many of Michigan State's guards throughout this game. But on the flip side, for Michigan State, led by Tyson Walker as per usual, he had 15 points, but not his best game on 6 of 18 shooting, 3 for 7 from 3. He ended up with 2 rebounds, 1 assist, and 1 block. So overall, that was kind of just how the game went for Michigan State in this one. Tyson Walker, still ended up with his 15. He averages a little bit over 18, but no one really shot it all that, consistently. And right behind Tyson Walker was Malik Hall, who had a bit more of an efficient game. Still not fantastic. He ended up with 12 points on 5 of 11 shooting, but he was 0 for 2 from 3, made both of his free throws, had 7 rebounds, 3 assists, 2 steals, and a block. So he put together a relatively solid all-around game for the Spartans. And our honorable mentions, actually at both 8 points apiece, but for Purdue, we've got Mason Gillis. Only ended up with 8 on 2 of 5 shooting, but all of those were 3-point shots, so 2 of 5 from 3. Made both of his free throws, which, again, similar to Lance Jones, were key free throws at the end there and making sure that Purdue held on to their lead. 3 points and 5 assists for the key bench player in Mason Gillis. For Michigan State, we've got AJ Hoggard, another familiar face for the Spartans. Only ended up with 8 points. You certainly would like for a bit more from a guy like that. On 3 of 8 shooting, 0 for 1 from 3. He was 2 for 3 from the free throw line, 4 rebounds, but where he made his money in this one was a playmaker. He had 10 assists. So he really was a big key in terms of just how this Michigan State offense worked this game. So he drew in a lot of guys and was able to find guys when they were open, find them under the basket. So despite only getting 8 points, 10 assists, 4 rebounds, still very solid performance for AJ Hoggard. But in terms of key team points for Purdue, it was losing points at the free throw line. Purdue shot a measly 18 for 27 from the free throw line, with Edey having 5 of those 9 misses himself, but 2 of those were also front end of 1-and-1s. So in close games like these free throws are so important for closing out the game, and Purdue was able to hit enough of them at the end of the game to do so. But if they had hit more of them earlier, they simply wouldn't have needed to be in such a tight spot late. That could be the difference maker against better teams down the line that won't shoot 39% from the floor and 22% from 3. And secondly, it comes down to smart defense. There were some unusual points in the game where I felt that some of Purdue's guards made some sort of unnecessary fouls, giving some on-ball defense just bumps and trying to take some swipes at ball handlers that just instantly got called for fouls. Now, I don't necessarily think that some of those should have gotten called. These refs were just very whistle happy, it seemed, throughout the game. Michigan State ended up with 29 fouls to Purdue's 17. Both ended up in the double bonus in the first half, and Purdue ended up in there as well in the second half. But it was just a very physical game. But defending without fouling, especially on ball handlers, is just a key fundamental part of playing defense at a high level. They can't afford to make that a habit. For Michigan State, it comes down to more production out of your top 4. The Spartans are still offensively top heavy when it comes to their style of offense. Walker, Hoggard, Akins, and Hall make up the majority of their offense. And even with a nice addition with Trey Holloman having 10 points of his own in this one, you have to have production from at least 3 out of their top 4 guys, so it seems, for them to have a solid offensive day. And this one, Tyson Walker manages to get his 15, but on that 6 of 18 shooting, so not his best day. Hall has a much more efficient game, getting his 12 on 5 of 11, but then you get Hogard and Akins, who combined for 12 on 5 of 19 shooting between the two. So they couldn't get shots to fall, and they do play pretty good defense, but they're not going to beat many teams if they can't step it up on offense. And secondly, for them, it was crashing the offensive glass. One thing that did keep them in this game, despite the disappointing shooting, was their ability to crash the offensive boards, out rebounding Purdue 14-12 in offensive boards. Whether that be because they crashed the boards really well, or they just capitalized on Purdue not boxing out really well, they still did it and did it well. And that made a big difference in this game. It led them to having 8 more shots than Purdue, knocking down 2 more. But it just wasn't enough to win, basically because of how much Purdue was able to get to the free throw line. But Purdue survives a rough one and moves on to take on Wisconsin in the semifinals in their 3rd matchup this season, with Wisconsin looking to capitalize on better play recently and get some revenge on the Boilers. 3rd time's the charm? We'll have to see. But for Michigan State, their season has not likely come to an end just yet, although they are definitely closer to the bubble than they would like to be at 19-14. If we hear it running the table, we're on the selection committee, let's just say it may or may not be a different story. But that's all I've got for today. We are just a couple days away from Selection Sunday. So here on the channel, you have so much content to choose from both Butler and Purdue game recaps, Boombuster Believable, and of course, our conference recaps, which we are just wrapping up. We've got it all. So stay tuned for even more college basketball content as the madness begins. And of course, we sleep in May. But until then, like and subscribe for more college basketball content. And until next time, I'm out.